We lived in Evanston. I was still going to school at Northwestern, and the original group moved from Texas to Evanston, and they started doing courses. And at that time, we were doing RS1 as a weeknight program, one session a week for like 8 or 9 weeks. And my wife had seen a brochure about the course, and she decided she wanted to go. And at that time, I didn't associate this with Joe Matthews. I'd met Matthews when I was in college at the Methodist Student Movement annual conference in Alabama. So I knew of Joe Matthews, but I didn't make the association between having met him and the fact that he was in Evanston. So my wife goes to the first session, and she came back and she said, "David, this is really interesting stuff." And they told us that if we wanted to bring people, it wasn't too late. So I went with her to the second session of this RS1. One of the teachers, I remember there were two. I remember two of the teachers, Don McCleskey and Joe Slicker. And Slicker did a conversation on Guernica. And I don't know, I can't remember what it was, but I took serious exception to what he was doing. And we got into a big argument. And I never went back. I never finished that course. My wife did. It would have been 2 years later. I was in my last year in graduate school in seminary, and we had an emergency in our family in that suddenly we had no place to live. We lost our apartment in Evanston, couldn't find another one. And so my friend Bob Fischel and his wife had joined the group that summer. And so we called Fischel and said, can we come and live on the west side with you guys? And he said, well, I'll have to talk to some people. Anyway, they talked, and they said, sure, come on. And so literally, we got involved with the order totally by accident. We were there for maybe a month, and then Fred Buss came to us and said, we know you're interested in what we're doing, and we found that it's not helpful to just be out on the edge. You've got to either be in or out. So my wife and I spent a very sobering night trying to decide what we were going to do, and we decided that we wanted to be in. Those 7 families that originally moved made up what we call the permanent house church. After we'd been there a year, there were at least 3 families, and there may have been 4, of those of us who had come since the initial group, who were invited to become a part of the house church. The Scotts, the Fischels, the Burdicks, and the Addingtons were invited into the permanent house church, which in effect meant that we had decided that this was what we were going to do with the rest of our lives. And it was sort of like that started the whole ball rolling. It was in 1965, the three of those, me and Fischel and Burdick, represented the order in the Selma March, working with Hosea Williams and Al Lingo and Jim Bevel as organizers for that march. That was in '65. In 1968, my wife and I, along with three others, made the first teaching trip to India. Fortunately, from our planning was such that we wound up literally going around the world to get to India and coming back. So I had never dreamed that I would have that opportunity, but it was a just everything was a new adventure relative to traveling. And I've often said part of it was traveling with Joe Slicker. He was an amazing man, and we got to know each other very well. And having a chance to spend most of the year in India was something I never recovered from. That was in '68. '69, we went back to India, and one of the members of the team was Art Brandenburg, who was Methodist chaplain at Yale University, someone that we'd known for quite a long time. And he was on the trip. In fact, he was leading the team. And in preparation, he had said, going back to India, he said, I want to meet Mother Teresa. And so and this was, give you, in terms of how things have changed, he sent a telegram to Mother Teresa saying that he was going to be in India and wanted to have a chance to meet her. And she replied that she'd be honored or welcome to have him visit. We were in Sri Lanka, and we were going from Sri Lanka to Calcutta. Well, Art became ill in Sri Lanka. Fortunately, there was a ship after the Second World War. It was an old military transport. They turned into a thing called the good ship Hope. It was very much like the ship that went to Puerto Rico. It had doctors and nurses, operating theaters, and they went around the world training people in medical procedures. And they really weren't supposed to have any Americans as part of it. It was all for the local people. This one happened to be in Colombo, Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as it was then. And so they took Art because he had an emergency. And so we had to leave him there. So we get back to India. I go to Calcutta, and I have a chance to meet Mother Teresa. It was something else. I've been amazed at people in talking about Mother Teresa, and she was an unbelievable person. But from my encounter with her, the last thing that she would have wanted was for somebody to try to make a saint out of her. She knew she wasn't a saint, and I got to see a side of that. She and I were in the sort of the main living area of their mother house, it was where the sisters gathered every afternoon for tea. And Mother Teresa and I were there. I wanted to hear about her order, the Sisters of Mercy. Well, she wanted to hear about our order, because all I had to say was, we are a family religious order. And she looked at me and says, how are you doing that? How are you having families in a religious order? So I got to tell her about us, and I got to hear about her. It turned out that the Sisters of Charity were just about the same age as we were. We'd been in existence like 7 years or so. And so we felt like that we had much to learn from each other. In the midst of this, a young Indian novitiate came wandering into the area where we were. And when Mother Teresa realized that she was there, she jumps up and she runs over to this woman and just starts berating her. What are you doing here? Why aren't you at work? Why, And she was genuinely angry. And so every time I think about her being made a saint, I think about that I saw a side of her that probably not many people had. And that was this righteous anger relative to this young woman not being where she was supposed to be. But beyond that, hearing her tell about her decision to minister to people who were dying, that was the only criteria, was that they were dying. She didn't ask, are you Hindu? Are you Muslim? Are you Christian? Are you anything? Those were not a part of the criteria was they were dying and they were alone. And her mission was to enable their dignified end with somebody there, whether it was her or one of the sisters. That was their only mission. And I thought, this woman in her thinking is so far ahead of where the church is. She's a part of the church, but she's on an edge that most people can't fathom. In a world where we divide everybody by denominations or faiths or nationalities. And here was a woman basing her ministry on humanity. And I thought, this is a remarkable human being. And I felt genuinely blessed having had a chance to spend time. And then when it was 4 o'clock in time for the sisters to have tea, she said to them, I want to introduce you to this man, and I want him to tell you about his order. And so I had a chance to tell our story to the sisters. It was really exciting. And that all happened. We joined in 64, and by the end of 69, all of that had already happened. I couldn't have imagined that later I would go and live in India and work in rural development. I couldn't have imagined that I would start religious houses in New York and Houston and Singapore. I couldn't have imagined that. But those, it turned out, they were in my future. And when I look back, I can't imagine any other vocation I could have chosen that would have opened the world to me. And it made all the difference in terms of how I look at people, how I look at the world, how I look at our nation, is all because of that exposure.